I've been going around the garden, and every day I've been picking just whatever I can find. So there'll be just a tiny little handful, palmful really, of berries. And I'm showing you actually the thing there's been most of, which are alpine strawberries here just down by the fence, and they're amazingly prolific. So every day I just pick a few, and I've been putting them in the freezer, open freezing them, and then putting them into a bag when there's enough to do that with. And I've actually got quite a lovely little stash in the bag, and I'm going to use them for something quite special to celebrate Lammas, which I shall show you. But first of all, I'm going to pick the ones that there are here. And this is what I've ended up with. This is a fairly typical amount, more of the alpine strawberries than anything else, but I've been giving them the washing up water. They've been quite lucky being just outside the back door, and it's made a huge difference. They've suddenly got bigger, and I don't know, it's really helped since I thought of doing that. So just to show it's worth saving. I'm going to be combining fruits from the garden, just as I said, the small amount that I have, but it's almost like a sacrifice. Lammas, one of the themes of Lammas is sacrifice, and it's almost like a sacrifice or offering, because it'll take most of what I've collected over the season. But I'm also going to combine them with something from the wild as well, foraged. So it's like a sort of spell for abundance in the garden, and also abundance from the hedgerows and the fields and the woods. It's still really, really hot and sunny, but I thought I would brave the heat for a minute to come out and just show you how the vegetable garden's coming on. Now it's looking really lush, and this is because I am watering it, and I know I'm lucky that we don't have a hose pipe ban here, and I'm not on a meter, so I am managing to water the garden properly for a change. And because it was so late getting started, I've just felt I needed to nurture it to get the maximum produce out, from this relatively small space. Really, I've given more of the space to the woodland garden, which we will look at in detail, but more once it's died down a bit, the vegetation underneath, the wild plants underneath. And then I'll be able to get in there and we can actually walk through it, which at the moment is an impossibility. There's actually one apple tree right in the middle there, and I did see an apple on it earlier, but I've tried to water from a distance and direct the water onto the trees that need it most. So that's why it still looks all right. And there's another apple tree. Not that I'm doing a full back tour of the woodland garden at the moment, but whenever I see something like some apples like that, I can't resist just showing you. And that's one called Tidman or Tideman's Late. So there's a few apples on that one. These are carrots. I haven't had any carrots yet, and there were some radishes, lots of radishes, but I've eaten the first lot of them, and there's some more coming on, and I love radishes, so they were really tasty in the salads that I've been having at lunchtime. There's some beetroot here. That's not quite ready yet, but the turnips, I'll just show you if I can. They are ready, and I haven't had any yet, but I've noticed there, you can see some purple there, can't you, through the stems. And they are turnips, and they are properly ready, so I'm really looking forward to trying those. I know not everybody likes turnips, but I think if you slice them nice and thinly and stir fry them, or you can roast them with other vegetables, or you can steam them in chunks with other vegetables, I think they're really tasty, and they're very easy to grow, and they're very winter hardy as well. So I'm actually going to do another lot yet, and hopefully get some later in the autumn as well. So that will be lovely. I hope if it works out, if the weather stays conducive. Now this is dill, which is a very favourite herb of mine. I love the flavour, but also it will seed itself. Once you've got some dill in the garden, you never have to sow any more, or so Hugh Richards says, whose gardening channel I really love. Recommend him for permaculture, vegetable productivity, budget tips, all that kind of thing. He's a really, really, really lovely young gardener. So if you don't know him already, I'll just link his, or at least put his channel down underneath in the comments. That's where I found quite a lot of my information, more up-to-date information. And the same with coriander, which you can see here. That's another one. Once you've sown it, as long as you let some of the plants go to seed, which is no hardship because you can use the seeds in cooking as well as you can the leaves, just in different ways or a different flavour, then you'll always have coriander. So that's my aim. One of the reasons, well, no, it's not the reason I planted them. I like them both. I sowed them. But it's also a benefit that you haven't got to sow them again. Now the beautiful leaves here, and they are beautiful because the sun's just shining through them. Really lovely, isn't it, this time of the afternoon? That's spinach. You can probably see that it is, but it's very happy and healthy. I may be making the most of that and actually using some of that in my smoothies, and I've also cooked some. And there's another salad leaf, I think it's a salad leaf, there's a winter type salad leaf there. I can't remember what it is, but it'll be useful anyway to add to salads, as which is what I sowed it for. And then we've got some courgettes, got courgettes dotted through the garden because I sowed them again very late, just the seeds on some paper, on some kitchen paper, and then when they germinated I popped them into some little pots, but I left them in the little pots for a bit too long really, so they were stunted. These are doing much better. They were the first ones I planted out, and I've had quite a few courgettes, which I'll show you. I'm going to do a little mini vegetable show and tell. When I've just shown you the growing, I'm going to do a little harvest thing, and just I'm going to amaze myself because I haven't put any of them together in the way I'm planning to do. So yeah, we'll wait for that one. Hopefully they'll look aesthetic as well as tasty, but the main thing is if they're tasty. This is the Monge 2 area, and they're coming to an end now, probably partly because I didn't support them, so they've got a bit lanky, but I've had lots of see if I can find a little area where there's some there to show you. But again, I've eaten a lot of those. And then another lovely crop are the broad beans, and I'm sure there are some of those that are ready, although I haven't tried them yet, but I'm looking forward to doing so. And they're again very healthy plants. I'm quite surprised really, they haven't had the most attention. These are French beans, and you can see they're purple ones, and they are really lovely, and they're very prolific. Again, a crop I really recommend because they are usually really healthy. They grow really well, don't need supporting. Well, that's enough reason really, and you can get several lots going in a year. I've got some more coming on in modules over the other side near the shed, which I'm going to put into little gaps wherever I can find some little gaps. And then there's some fennel, which was that had kind of just stayed here really, but I let it go, and it's got seeds, very pretty anyway, but also it's got seeds that I can harvest if I get to them quickly enough before they fall off. And these are the lettuce, or different sorts of lettuce, and they are interspersed with quite a lot of weeds here, but I think you can see which of the crops are going to be now they're bigger, I can see where they are and where the weeds are. I can actually deal with them, and what I'll do is I'll just pull the weeds up that I don't want. I say weeds, but things I don't want. And then I can see these little tomato plants that have come up, for example, in the compost, and I'll just lay them down, or I might chop them if they're bigger, but I'll just lay them down between the rows, and then that will enrich the earth. It's feeding the soil with the weeds. So it's like, again, this is a Hugh Richards phrase, but he calls it harvesting nutrition when you weed, which is quite a nice way of looking at it, because they then go to feed the plants that you actually want, which makes the task seem a little bit less arduous, I think. So there are rows coming up here, but you won't be able to necessarily tell. I think you can see a row of spinach there because of all the plants in between, but I might as well show you, because when it's growing more, then you'll have seen it here first, and you'll know the difference, and how amazing nature is really. These marigolds are coming on, not coming on, they are good. They're not just coming on, they're in full flower, and they haven't succumbed quite as much as the ones at the other end of the garden to the mildew that they tend to get. And I think they've been kept nice and verdant by the fact that they're next to the runner beans, which I've been keeping watered, and the same goes for the nasturtiums that have seeded themselves underneath as well. And they're all good companion plants. They're supposed to keep the pests off the actual things you want, Not sure if they have, but I will say that the plants looking like these runner bean plants are looking really healthy. I wonder if it's actually just again been too dry for the things that would normally attack them. I don't know. It's a strange year. There's a couple more courgette plants, and I've had some courgettes. This one, I haven't had any from this one. I know that because I can see it's a yellow one. See the yellow down there? And I haven't actually eaten any yellow courgette yet, but the other one's green, and that's had a courgette or two on it already. So I think it's not a huge vegetable garden. I'd like where all these nettles are here, and there's the compost heap there, but where these nettles are here, I'd like to make another smaller raised bed for next year. Look at those nettles. They were trimmed down, but it just encourages them really. But they're really good nutritionally for the ground, so I'm going to put some of them on the compost heap and maybe get round to making small plant feed in rainwater. But we'll see, because I've already got some that I haven't used yet. But there's a drain cover here. See that paving slab? So you've got to be a bit careful. I can't just make a bed willy-nilly. It's going to have to be in a particular shape, and I'll have to move that apple tree there to make space. But that's I'm not going to worry about that now. That's all for the autumn. So I've just manoeuvred myself through a little sea of nettles just to show you, while we're at this end of the garden, the Beth pear tree, which has still got, I think, well, I didn't count just now, but it did have 8 pears on it, and hopefully it still does. They're not that big, but I've also read that Beth pears aren't that big, and they're ready in August, and it is August, so I'm going to keep a close eye on them, because last year I didn't get any because they just all disappeared basically overnight, so I don't want that to happen again, although I can't be keeping guard over it all the time, so it's possible it will happen. But as soon as one of them seems to be ready, I will pick them all, I think, and at least get to taste them this year. I didn't literally get to taste one last year because they all disappeared, and the tree was covered last year. There were far more than 8. There were probably, well, I don't know, maybe 30. So this is the little clematis which grows up it, which is so pretty, and that's been going for a long time. Can't quite remember what it is. I just got it from a garden centre, actually, just a small plant, but very lovely. If I find out what it is, I'll let you know, because I would definitely recommend it for climbing through other trees or just climbing over a trellis or something. You can see in front of the compost heap there, comfrey growing, and I've got a few clumps of comfrey around the garden because that's something that's really good for making plant feed out of, and also you can just cut it down and cut it up and put it around plants just on its own, or put it on the compost heap. So I'm really happy to see it where it grows, and you can also cut it down several times in the season and it'll just grow back up again, which is really useful. It's a very good plant. And actually very pretty as well, I think. I've just lightly cooked, maybe for about 5 minutes, and then a bit of water and some maple syrup, because I don't have sugar, but I have coconut sugar, which is quite a treacly flavour. I didn't want to change the flavour of the fruit, so I've used some maple syrup, but you could use sugar. And as I say, a bit of water, and I've put in there a selection of fruits from the garden that I had just put together, frozen it all together. So there are alpine strawberries, ordinary strawberries, raspberries, tayberries, blackcurrants, red currants, blackberries, like cultivated ones. I think that's probably all alpine strawberries, did I say that? But only a few of each, but it made quite a good portion, and I used an equal amount of blackberries from the hedgerow that I've been collecting every day. So it's a mixture of the cultivated fruits and the wild fruits, which I thought would be quite evocative of the season. So I've cooked those, and you can see the steam rising. And then what I've done here is I've got a pudding basin. Don't know what size that is. Not very big. Not very good on sizes. Pint and a half. Don't know, litre. I don't know. Something like that, and I've lined it with bread. Now this is a sourdough bread. It's made by actually my neighbours down the road, have a artisan bakery from their bungalow, and I specially ordered this white sourdough. I put it in the freezer so I could have it ready for this, because I planned to do this for some time. So I've lined the basin as best I can with the bread, I'm going to spoon in the berries, and then I'm going to put some more bread on the top, weight it down overnight, and then in the morning, which will be lammas, old lammas, tip it out on the plate, and obviously we'll come back and have a look. If there are, I'm going to keep a bit of the juice if I can, and if there are any gaps, bready looking gaps, I can just spoon some more juice over so it's all berry coloured all over. So that is the plan. Now let's see how it works. I'll show you how it's looking once I get the bread, once I get the little parcel all parcelled up of bread. Back again, it's not very elegant, but I'm going to push the edges all in, and then I'll put some, I think probably some parchment paper over it, and then a weight. But I'll give that a go in a minute. I know it's nothing outrageously different. It's a summer pudding, but I'm making it as lammas pudding with this twist that it's got the garden fruits and the hedgerow fruits, and the colour is just beautiful, so I'm hoping it will be lovely when it's turned out. That's the leftover juice, so I've managed to save a little bit to kind of patch it in if I need to. So I'll just cover it with and put the weights on, and then I'll just show you how it's going to be left overnight. I covered the basin with a bit of baking parchment, and I found a plate to put on top, and I thought I'd just show you because it's a lovely plate as it happens. I took a little while to find one that had a large enough base here to cover the basin properly. For some reason they all seem too small, but this one is really perfect, and it was given to me. It's a vintage plate that a friend of mine gave me several years ago now, a long time before I came here anyway, when my husband was still alive and all that. So it's a very special plate to me, and it's perfect for this job as well. So I may even put the finished pudding onto it as well. I think I probably will, because it's just, the swallow itself is like a late summer charm, isn't it? So I've found something to use as a weight on the top. When I put it in the fridge overnight, I'll have to find something a bit flatter, but just for now I found because it's really heavy, it's like a stoneware jar which was in the sitting room, which I like because it's local. I like these sort of local things, and it says on it, Lawrence and Sons, 1 penny, old penny, will be charged for screws if not returned in bottle. And it's Great Yarmouth, which is, I don't know, about half an hour around the coast probably from here. I really look forward to unmoulding it tomorrow morning, and I'll show you. Obviously we'll have a look again and see what it looks like finished. There have been so many blackberries, after all my misgivings about blackberries this year, that I've wanted to do some other things with them as well as freezing them, because I've got bags and bags of them in the freezer already, and there may well be more, but I can already sense that the best ones are kind of coming to an end and getting a bit squishy, so I thought, think of some other things. Now, I know that probably a lot of people know about making blackberry brandy or other kinds of spirit liqueur. You could use gin or I suppose whiskey. What I wanted to do though was, rather than making a kind of liqueur with sugar, I wanted just to make a tincture. I think they would call it a folk tincture because it's sort of the simplest way of making it, which is like making a liqueur but without any sugar in. So I'm just literally going to cover my blackberries with brandy in this case, and that will make it quite medicinal just to have a teaspoonful for things like colds and flu. The blackberries themselves have got lots of vitamin C and are antiviral, and the brandy is good, for warming, and like a nice warming thing if you're feeling under the weather. So that's what I thought I would do. Now, what I've got in this jar here, you can probably see, I'll just come a bit closer like this, that the jar's only half full, and these are blackberries I picked last night, actually, in the evening. It was almost dark. I went down a slightly different place from where I'd normally go, close to the old church, and because I'd noticed some rowan trees there, and I picked some rowan berries as well, so which I'll show you what I'm going to do with those as well. But I wanted to go because it was Old Lammas Eve, and it just felt like a good time to do it. And so those blackberries here, the few that there are, because it was getting dark, are from Old Lammas Eve, and I'm going to cover them with brandy. And then a bit later on I'm going to go out down the lane here and pick some more, enough to fill the jar, and then I'll cover again with brandy to the top. I know it's a simple little thing, and in a way it doesn't really make a lot of sense in that
Lammas itself, I think, as we know it as a single date, is probably a bit of a construct anyway. But there's just something about the feeling of this time of year, and I think that to make something where I've collected half of the fruit on Old Lammas Eve and the other half on Old Lammas Day, it's just a tiny little extra layer of magic that I shall really remember when I actually come to sample this little medicinal brew. I thought we should have just a quick look at the front garden. Yesterday I gave it some water and given it a little bit of a tidy up, just a little tiny bit. You might not think so, but I've deadheaded and that kind of thing. So I thought I would just show you one or two things that are a bit different, and also there's a new arrival in the garden thanks to a gift from some kind friends, which I'll show you in a minute. So the flowers are not quite so prolific at the moment because certain things have finished. One of the things I wanted to mention was, if you look at the heleniums, you can see that some of them, like the one in front of us here, basically the flower's finished. And as I was going round, I thought, oh, I must snip those off. And then I thought, no, because the whole idea of having the kind of plants that are good for wildlife because they like those heads in the winter to provide shelter, and also they're really sculptural, because what happens is the leaves come off, the petals come off, and you're left with these lovely little knobbly tops which are really lovely, especially with the frost on them. So I cut a couple off and then I realised actually no, these are staying. So certain things are still at their best. I'd say that the veronicastrum is still pretty nice, and the bees are enjoying that. It's nice that there are still some flowers for the bees. Oop, there it goes past me. The sanguiscorba, which is this long name for a small flower, I want to tie it back, but I've tried. I cannot get canes into the ground. It is literally rock hard at the moment, so that is going to have to wait, and I just have to move it when I want to go past it. But luckily there's no need to go past it all that much. There's more of the veronicastrum. The roses are all over, I think, now. The little trees are doing quite nicely though. That's the crabapple tree in the corner, and this one's the wayfaring tree here, and there's another one of those in the back, but that's one of the things which is lost in the jungle, so we'll have a look at that later in the season. And the Japanese anemones are really still looking lovely. They're always worth another look. And most things are, surviving and looking as nice as you might expect really at this time of year. One of the next things I'm going to do is to cut back all these hardy geraniums here. They've still got some pretty flowers on, but if I cut them right back, I think that they'll then rejuvenate and get another flush of flowers later on. So it's worth doing that now and sacrificing the flowers that are left. Another thing, flower-wise, is that the Michaelmas daisies we were looking at before, there are indeed a few more. So I'm pleased about that. It's only one plant, but that plant is looking established, I'd say. So hopefully that will come back again, and I will get a few more of those. I think that mauve, purpley, lilac-y colour with the yellow middles, golden middles, is just such a beautiful combination. And that was the white. And then anemone, I never say it very well, which is also looking at its best, really lovely. There's some more bees. They definitely like the veronicastrum. There it goes. It's nice to have found something else that they like. And in the hedge behind, then the blackberries are my own hedge, strangely in a way, because they do get some water when I'm watering, just because I'm watering, but they're not actually doing that well. They look rather like they tended to in the hedgerow last year, when you get these huge clusters with nothing much in them. But I don't know, I haven't picked any from my own hedge. All the ones I've picked have been from the wild, which have been better, which is fine because it's such a good year for them. This is the new arrival in the garden. You can see it out of the sitting room window, so it's a nice position. I think it was positioned here partly because it's actually one of the few places in the front garden where you could actually get the spike stuck into the ground, because as I say, it's so hard, but it's actually a really nice place for it as well because of being able to see it from the sitting room window, and it's on this metal pole that it will bend and fly in the wind. I've come back from down the lane with my blackberries, just giving them a good wash. I'm going to add these new blackberries, Lammas blackberries, to the ones in the jar, and then we'll give them a bit of a shake up and have a look and see what they're looking like. I've squashed in as many blackberries as I can right to the top, and I've covered them right over with the brandy. So it's looking quite brown at the moment, but as the juice comes out, it'll start to look nice and purple. And I should have said as well that if you don't want to use alcohol at all, then you can make a version of this with apple cider vinegar, which I'm going to do as well, because if you make a blackberry vinegar, you can then use it actually on salads and things like that, or in other ways of using it when you're cooking, and you can also mix it with sparkling water to make a refreshing drink. So I'm going to do that as well. You would do it in exactly the same way, just with blackberries and apple cider vinegar. I haven't got any of that at the moment, but I'm going to go and get some tomorrow, I think. So we'll strike while the iron's hot and while the blackberries are still good. So I shall put this somewhere in a dark place, warm but not too warm, just a cupboard will be fine. And then give it a shake every so often when I think of doing so. And then probably in about a month, I should think, that will be ready to strain off. Now for the moment of truth with the Lammas pudding. I've taken it out of the fridge, I've taken the weight off, and I'm just going to unmould it. I've taken it outside in case the juice spurts everywhere. And here it is, and I'm glad to say that it came out really well, without needing any of the extra juice or anything that I did save for it. I might pour that over the top anyway, because to make it even nicer. But look, I'm really pleased. So it only remains to slice it and see what it looks like inside. And I've got some coconut yogurt to serve with it, so I'm looking forward to dishing it up. There we are. I can't believe quite how perfectly that's turned out. It looks quite classic, doesn't it? More by luck than judgment. And I think you'll agree that is Lammas food of the gods. Yesterday evening I went out to where I'd seen a couple of Rowan trees before. It was getting a little bit late for it. I always seem to cut things a bit fine, and it was getting a little bit dark. So I did find the Rowans though, because they're obviously, the berries are so bright that you can't help but find them. I could see as well, even though it was a bit dark, that a lot of the berries weren't as good as they might be. I'm sure because of the dry conditions, a lot of them were already shriveled up, like that one there, and very dark. But I found some that I could see were good. And I want to make a Rowan jelly, but that will not be today. But it's because it's Old Lammas Day today, I thought I would like to at least thread my Rowan string. What that is, if you don't know, is it's a threaded string of Rowan berries, and traditionally people used to hang them up in the house to protect the house. Rowan berries are always said to be protective, whether of people or of people used to use the branches and the berries and twigs over cattle buyers as well. And but at Lammas, of course, that's when the berries are actually ready, so it seems the really appropriate time to do this. I have got one in the house that I made. I don't think I actually did it last year, I think it was the year before last, but it's dried out and it still looks really orange, but it's actually tied over a mirror in the kitchen really close to the fireplace, which is the hearth. People used to put them where traditionally put them over doors or windows or fireplaces, or anywhere where anything of bad intent could enter. So you might think it's just a token idea now, but there's nothing to be lost from doing it, and I like to keep up the old traditions. So the number of beads, as you might call them, beads, I have read, and this is in the West Country, should be 45 berries in a strand. I haven't heard this for Norfolk specifically, but because I have that as a number, that's what I'm going to go for again. And once I've got the new strand, I shall knot it where the old one is at the moment, and the old one is totally biodegradable, of course, so I will either burn it if I do have a fire, or I could bury it, or I could even put it on the compost heap, so it returns to earth and nurtures more plants. I don't know which I'm going to do yet, but any of those would be good options. I used linen threads before. Actually, I've got some here because this is what I was going to use this time. So I've had this for many, many years, this linen thread. It's served me well for all sorts of things. And I love the fact it's really fine and really strong and lovely natural colour and pure natural fibre. But when I got my needle case out, showing you everything, my needle case, beautiful needle case, which I didn't make, but it's very lovely. And I got it out, and there was a needle in there, which I thought that'll be a good size, but it was already threaded with this really beautiful. It's an embroidery thread, but it's been dyed in different. It kind of graduates from one shade of ready orange to another, and I thought that just is so fortuitous, because what could be a better colour than something fiery like the Rowan berries themselves, and that also seems nice and fiery and protective. So that's what I'm going to use, and it's even a really good length already. So it's amazing. It actually seems made for the job, even though I didn't know that was going to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread the 45 beads on. I keep calling them beads, but berries that are going to act as beads, and they have a pip in the middle, but it's not difficult to feel the needle around them. So while I'm threading, I thought I'd talk a little bit about Old Lammas, and I hope they're not going to fall off the ends. Let me just see if I can work out how to do this. I'll drape it here and then just keep threading while I talk to you. Yes, so Old Lammas, the reason I call it Old Lammas tide is because I know you may have heard me talking about the Julian calendar before, but it's a really useful thing for us now, because if we miss the date of the 1st of August, for example, with Lammas, now we can always say to ourselves, well, that's okay, because we can do the same things on Old Lammas. And for myself, I prefer the idea of using Old Lammas as a marker, because I'm very interested in how things were done in medieval times and before, Anglo-Saxon, and obviously well before that in prehistory. They're the eras that really call to me. And of course, at that time, the calendar was not our calendar that has been gradually changed to try to keep calendrical time in line with astronomical time. And the biggest change that we had was in 1752, when 11 days were taken out of September that year. And now that's now changed, is now gradually over time become 13 days, because it's still not perfect, the calculation. And that's because I only discovered this part of it quite recently, actually. The fact that we always say that there's 365 and a quarter days. So that's why we have a leap year every 4 years, so that quarter day can be made up into one whole day. But the actual calculation isn't exactly 365 and a quarter. It's something like 365.24 something, not 0.25, which means that, of course, over time that calculation is going out all this. Basically, it's becoming less accurate all the time. It's so pretty, and actually, just happens what I'm wearing. I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a colour addict, but the colour of what I'm wearing goes so beautifully with the beads, completely coincidentally. But Lammas is a bit of an unusual festival, because everyone seems to love it, because we've got this lovely feeling of harvest and goldenness and the grain coming in and all those fabulous things, and harvest loaves and blackberries and all that imagery for Lammas. But really, of the festivals, I think it's the most tenuous in terms of really having a tradition behind it. That apart from if you're in Ireland, in which case it's Lunasa, and they have the Lunasa games, and it's celebrating the god Lu and his mother, his foster mother Tailtu, who he wanted to celebrate and honour her by holding games in her honour, and horse racing and horse riding and horse trading is very much associated with that festival in Ireland, because Lou was said to be a master horseman, and games because he was strong and he had he was skillful in many sports. So that all makes sense. But even then, in Ireland, it's not one specific day. the whole month of August is known as Lunasa, as Colette on Bales and the Cottage channel tells us. The whole month is known as that, and I've heard that somewhere else as well, that Ireland does still have lots of games and horse fairs and so on, but they're spread through August. It's the Lammas tide. When we say the word tide for the time of the year there's a festival, it truly is a whole tide, not just one day. And when we use the term Lammas, that's a shortening of loaf mass, because it's a celebration of the first loaf, the first grain, and so on. And mass because it would have been a celebration in church, and I would imagine it would have been the nearest Sunday, in fact, to when the first loaf was ready. I don't know that. That's my guess. But in any case, it wasn't a fixed date. It was celebrating that moment, and some pagans do say that they celebrate when they do see signs in nature of the festivals. So that would mean the 1st of August was a bit redundant as a definite date. But I think that most people do like to have something to work to, and it's lovely, the idea of everybody or lots of people all doing these same observances on the same day, and you can imagine people everywhere else. It's a very powerful idea that everyone's doing things at the same time, except that I like doing things on Old Lammas. Not that I'm the only one. So that's a little tiny background of why I actually prefer the feeling of celebrating now, which I don't think I have really said, but that's because in the times before 1752, which obviously is not that long ago really, they would have the time that they would have celebrated would be later, it would be now. So how the weather is, how the conditions are now, is how our ancestors would have experienced those festivals. And that's the same, of course, for all of the festivals, including things like Christmas. So anything which is calendrical rather than an astronomical event like a solstice, which just happens when it happens. So how it feels now is, this is the feeling that people would have felt in old days. In old days. Let's just be unspecific and say old days, but before 1752 anyway. I'll continue to thread, and I'll come back and show you when the chain is complete. I like the fact that they're different shades, rather like the thread itself. Some of them are redder and some of them are oranger. They came from 2 different trees, but I'm not sure that made the difference in the colour of the berries. Actually, I think some of the berries of each tree were the different colours. Here we are. I've got 45 berries on there. You have to take my word for it, but I've just counted them twice to be sure. So I shall take this inside, knot it over the mirror, and I'll just show you what we're replacing. It's got quite dark in here, but you can probably just about make out that there's a Rowan berry thread strand just here over the mirror, and you can see how desiccated the berries are, but they have still got a lovely orange glow about them, and they're tied. You can see here the linen that they were tied with, but they're actually knotted directly over this decorative side part of the mirror. So I'm going to carefully unknot that, and then I'll put the new one here. Whoops, I'm knocking bits of herb off. I'm going to put that into its place, much more fresh and vibrant looking. There we are, and even in this dim light you can see how much more vibrant this one is. Now there's 2 things I thought of while I was tying it, as I meant to say. One is, if you do make one, if you tie it loosely first, because the berries will shrink, and then you can kind of tighten it up and tie it permanently. And the other thing, which is linked to that, is you want it to form a full circle, because if anything which is circular, that's kind of part of the protection. It's something with no beginning and no end, which is, how many circles there are, which are very significant in all sorts of traditions like wedding rings and many more. So that's important as well. But you can make sure that happens if you just tighten up the thread once the berries have shrunk a bit. I mean, at the moment this is a bit higgledy-piggledy, but I think it will sort itself out again as the berries settle themselves. So I'm pleased. And as you can see, it really kind of lights up the corner of the kitchen.